consumers with perks like fraud protection, cashback bonuses, and the convenience of not having to carry around cash. They also make it much easier to spend money, even money that you don't have. With concern about the strength of the American consumer gradually creeping into the business media, it's now a good time to look at the industry that most benefits from every transaction a consumer makes. Join us as we delve into the trillion-dollar credit card industry and uncover why credit card companies are so eager to get you to swipe their cards. To understand how the credit card industry became so lucrative, we first have to understand how it was built and how it currently works. The precursors to modern credit cards were created in the early 1900s and were called charge. These small pieces of sheet metal were used by regular customers of large vendors, so that the customer wouldn't have to hand over exact cash every time they bought something. Instead, they could just have the merchant record the transaction using the customer's information on the charge plate, and then pay the merchant in a lump sum on some less frequent interval. These charge plates allowed for quicker bookkeeping for the merchant and more convenient shopping for the customer. The idea of the charge plate was expanded in the 1930s with airline travel cards that allowed customers to purchase tickets from different companies using the same card. In 1958, it was expanded further with the first worldwide credit card network, created by American Express. This credit card allowed customers to make purchases at any merchant that was part of its network, in any industry, anywhere in the world. However, the defining feature of modern credit cards wasn't invented until Bank of America launched the Bank Americard in 1958. Their card was the first credit card to offer credit. Instead of allowing cardholders to pay off their entire balance each month, it allowed them to carry a balance and make minimum payments while accruing interest on the remaining amount. This provided consumers with greater flexibility in managing their finances, and potential customers feel like they had more access to spending. Bank Americard eventually became Visa, one of the most recognizable credit card networks in the world today. MasterCard, originally MasterCard, was quickly developed by other banks including Citibank to compete with Visa. To this day, Visa and MasterCard are the two most widely accepted credit card networks in the world, followed by the older American Express and the newer Discover. Discover targeted the lower end of the consumer spectrum and was created in 1985 by Sears, at the time the largest retailer in the country. The Discover card had appropriate features such as no annual fee and cashback bonuses. But how do the credit card companies make money, and how much money do they make? When someone says credit card company, they could be referring to either the credit card issuer or the credit card network. The issuer is a bank that actually provides the money that gets sent to the merchant when a customer swipes their credit card. It's a short-term lender and makes money primarily through credit card interest, late fees, annual fees, and sometimes interchange fees charged to the merchants. So it would be a Chase Bank, Citibank, Bank of America, and so on. The credit card network is Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and so on. It provides the network and clears transactions between the credit card issuer and the merchant. It's basically the center of the transactions, connecting the customer side with the merchant side. There's also another party involved called the merchant acquirer. The merchant acquirer interacts with the credit card network on behalf of the merchant, taking care of all the technical mechanics. The large issuing banks, like Bank of America and JP Chase, also provide acquirer services to large merchants. But there are also smaller merchant acquirers that you have likely heard of, like PayPal, Stripe, and Clover. As you would expect, every single one of the involved parties takes a percentage off of each and every credit card transaction. The issuing bank may charge an annual fee, sometimes in the thousands of dollars. For example, the Citi Strata Premier card charges a $95 annual fee. The issuer also charges an annual percentage rate, frequently over 20%, as well as late fees, over-limit fees, and all sorts of other fees. The credit card network charges are called interchange reimbursement fees and are generally in the 2% range. For example, Visa charges a little over 1.7% on most transactions, and American Express charges as much as 2.4% on certain transactions. Then we have the merchant acquirer's cut. JP Morgan Merchant Services charges on the order of an extra 1% of their own, bringing the total cost to the merchant to a little over 2.9%. While the fees charged by any one of these parties may not seem exorbitant, when you add up the approximately 3% charged by the network and acquirer with the fees and interest charged by the issuer, the money adds up quickly. Last year, Visa, one of the biggest networks, did $45 billion of gross revenue, about $21 billion of that turning into operating profit. To put these numbers into perspective, the $21 billion of operating income that Visa made last year, just as a credit card network, is more than 3 times what Netflix made that same year. With so much money to be made in the credit card system, credit card companies have been pouring billions of dollars into trying to get people to spend more with their credit cards. Last year, Visa alone spent well over $1 billion on marketing efforts. It was their second biggest expense behind personnel, even ahead of networking and processing expenses. They've had ads in the Super Bowl and Olympics, and even had a James Bond commercial around the time of a big movie release. This may seem a bit odd, because when you get a credit card, you don't get it from Visa. You get it from the issuing banks such as Wells Fargo or Citi. But the issuing banks themselves do even more marketing and have gotten more creative than just running advertisements. In fact, going all the way back to the very first Bank Americard in the 1950s, credit card companies have engaged in controversial marketing techniques. Back in the 1950s, when Bank of America launched Bank Americard, they would send active credit cards unsolicited to millions of people. These were actual credit cards, not credit card applications. Throughout the next several years, tens of millions of these credit cards were dropped on people, many of whom would not be given a credit card today. This predictably led to huge problems and public backlash, including a wave of credit card fraud and delinquencies. It was reported that 22% of Bank Americard accounts were delinquent in the first few years. The practice of unsolicited credit card drops was outlawed by the Truth in Lending Act, but that wasn't before millions of people had started using credit cards as their means of spending. Today, credit card issuers use even more creative ways of marketing, including access to airport lounges, cash back, and new customer bonuses. For example, the Chase Sapphire Reserve card gives new cardholders $1,125 towards travel if they spend $4,000 with the card in the first 3 months. They also give cardholders $300 every year as a reimbursement for travel expenses. Almost all credit card issuers offer cash back, discounts, bonuses, or other benefits to their cardholders. In economics, there is no free lunch. So how do they fund these generous promotions? The dirty secret of the credit card industry is that the marginal cost of processing a transaction is very low, a tiny fraction of the 3% they charge to merchants. If we look at Visa's 2023 income statement, they made $45 million of gross revenue. Their network and processing expenses, which is the cost of actually processing the transactions, was only about $700 million, less than 2% of gross revenue. Their single largest expense by far is client incentives, which total more than $12 billion. This is the money they pay to the likes of JP Morgan Chase and other credit card issuers to help fund consumer promotions. Visa spends another $1.3 billion on its own marketing and has almost $10 billion of corporate overhead. This leaves them with $21 billion of operating income for an almost 50% profit margin. All of Visa's revenue is indirectly paid by consumers. Retailers increase their list prices by a few percent to offset the payment processing fees. So while you might get some benefits from your credit card issuer, you end up paying way more than that in the form of higher retail prices. All these efforts by credit card companies have succeeded in the sense that consumer spending via credit cards is at an all-time high. Academic studies have shown that using credit cards creates measurable chemical changes in the brain versus using cash to make purchases. Researchers say that when using a credit card, people feel the pain of losing money less than when paying with cash. This makes it easier to part ways with their hard-earned money in exchange for frivolous purchases. Researchers have also documented that consumers are more likely to spend more, make more frequent purchases, and give larger tips when using credit cards. According to Federal Reserve data, total consumer revolving credit loans, which basically means credit cards, have peaked at over $1 trillion in the past year, with the upward trend accelerating since COVID. People just seem addicted to swiping their credit cards. And companies aren't slowing down when it comes to driving people to spend more. Some companies are trying to take their own piece of the credit card pie with so-called buy now, pay later schemes. These schemes allow consumers to make purchases and push back their payments by months or even years, often with 0% interest. Buy now, pay later companies primarily generate revenue by charging fees to the merchants. That's how they're able to offer 0% interest rates in many cases. The merchant is subsidizing the interest expense in an effort to get consumers to buy stuff. The temptation this brings to consumers to spend more has been immense. Affirm, one of the biggest such companies, has seen its usage skyrocket over the past several years. But consumers are starting to show signs of stress under this increasing debt burden. Affirm's credit losses have increased fivefold over the past 2 years, representing more than 20% of revenue in 2023. While it doesn't quite seem like we're in danger of seeing widespread defaults, there are starting to be signs of weakening among consumers in general. This has market analysts asking, at what point will all this debt be too much for the American consumer to handle? Americans have a reputation for spending a lot of money. American consumerism is mocked as a sign of lack of discipline, short attention spans, and propensity to be influenced by both advertisers and the people around us. But it has also been fueled by an entire industry of some of the world's largest and most profitable companies, capitalizing on the propensity to spend. Credit cards are indeed much more convenient than carrying around cash, and the cashback bonuses and fraud protection are convincing influences to encourage us to use them. But at the end of the day, we buy more stuff than we would have if we didn't use credit cards for everything. With the amount of money the credit card networks, merchant acquirers, and banks take off of each transaction, the equilibrium prices of all products has been pushed up, making everything more expensive for everyone, whether you use a credit card or not. And as long as people have more money to spend, companies will continue to find new ways to make it as easy as possible to spend it. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about credit card companies? Do you think they bear responsibility for the rise in consumer spending? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out. In February 2023, the UK media was abuzz with news that a Nigerian billionaire was about to pay £90 million to acquire the professional football team Sheffield United. With football being the most popular sport in Britain, Sheffield United is beloved both in its home city and has fans across the country. The Nigerian billionaire in question was a man by the name of Dozie Mabozie. Up until recently, very few people in the West had ever heard of him. And to this day, very few people in Nigeria had ever heard of him. Dozie founded a company called Tingo Mobile, which claims to be one of the largest fintech and mobile phone companies in Nigeria. It went public on the Nasdaq in December of 2022 through a reverse merger, and at its peak reached a valuation of over $1 billion. The company claimed it was revolutionizing the agricultural industry in Nigeria, helping farmers to access an efficient online payment network and selling their produce through Tingo's online marketplace. They had signed up over 9 million farmers across Nigeria and Ghana, and were generating hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. But in November of 2023, the SEC suspended trading in Tingo's shares, and soon thereafter charged Dozie with committing securities fraud on a massive scale. According to the SEC, Tingo's business operations were almost entirely fake. Instead of having 9 million customers, they had almost zero, and when they claimed to have over $60 million in their bank account, they had less than 2,000. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into how Dozie Mabozie was able to turn a non-existent house of cards into a $1 billion Nasdaq-listed company. Supposedly, Dozie Mabozie founded Tingo in 2001. The business model was initially simple. They purchased cell phones and lent them to farmers in Nigeria. Many farmers at the time had very low incomes and couldn't afford to buy a phone outright. The leasing model was far more affordable and accessible. Later, Tingo also created an online marketplace which can be accessed through the smartphones. The platform connects farmers with purchasers of their crops, as well as sellers of fertilizers and other supplies. It's kind of like Facebook Marketplace for farmers. By 2019, Dozie and Tingo Mobile had leased cell phones to 9 million farmers across Nigeria and was generating hundreds of millions of dollars of annual revenue. Dozie's next goal was to list Tingo on a major U.S. stock exchange. This would give the company international recognition and make it far easier for the company to raise capital and fund future growth. In November of 2020, Dozie applied to list Tingo Mobile on the New York Stock Exchange through a direct listing. The application was denied. So in July of 2021, Dozie instead sold Tingo Mobile to an OTC-listed company called iWeb through an all-stock merger. Prior to the acquisition, iWeb was based in Thailand. Its original business was selling software to the Thai government and corporate customers in Thailand. This business was a failure, so they wound it down. If iWeb wanted to keep their company afloat, they would need to acquire a new business, so they agreed to acquire Tingo Mobile for a $3.7 billion valuation. It's important to note that this acquisition was paid entirely in iWeb stock. iWeb didn't have significant operations, so the value of the company was arguably close to zero. Given the low trading volume in the stock, the $3.7 billion was only on paper. There was no way to realize it. Following the acquisition, iWeb changed its name to Tingo Inc., and Dozie became the CEO. Due to the fact that it didn't trade on a major stock exchange, its trading volume was low. If Dozie wanted to cash out, he needed to get Tingo listed on a major stock exchange. In October of 2021, just months after the acquisition and name change, Tingo Inc. applied to uplist Tingo Inc. from the over-the-counter markets to the New York Stock Exchange. The application was not approved. The process for getting onto a major US exchange is very onerous, with market cap, share price, liquidity, corporate governance, and auditing requirements. At the time, Tingo Inc. was too small to accomplish this, so instead of knocking on the front door, Dozy decides to come through the side window. In December of 2022, Tingo Inc. sold the Tingo Mobile operating company to a Nasdaq-listed company called NICT. NICT was a microcap insurance brokerage and wealth management company operating in Canada. Following the acquisition of Tingo Mobile, NICT changed its name to Tingo Group. Just like the iWeb acquisition, this was an all-stock merger. Tingo Inc. Holdings shareholders, of which Dozy was the largest, would own 75% of the combined entity. Dozy also became the co-CEO of the combined company. So why would a Chinese insurance brokerage buy a Nigerian cell phone leasing company? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Regardless of the questionable strategic rationale, the acquisition seemed to be a huge financial success. In the first 9 months of 2023, the combined company generated $2.4 billion of revenue and $300 million of net income. The vast majority of this came from Tingo Mobile. In their investor presentation, the combined company repeatedly emphasized that they only acquired Tingo Mobile after conducting extensive due diligence. This can't help but remind me of the famous saying from Shakespeare, that the lady doth protest too much. Things got even more interesting in February of 2023 when the company announced that they'd expand into a new industry. They would invest $1.6 billion to build a massive food processing plant in Nigeria. This would be Africa's largest food processing facility. The idea was that they could buy raw food from the millions of farmers already using the Tingo Mobile online agriculture marketplace. They would process this food into finished products, which could be sold in Nigerian grocery stores. This sounds like a reasonable idea, but as always, the devil is in the details.